everybody, welcome back to the Noel Casler podcast, episode 77. I'm coming to you from Nantucket this morning, Monday morning. There's my intro on my travel Mando guitar. Apologize for the sloppiness, but I'm happy to be back here with you guys. 77 episodes, and the insanity does not stop, but I always love and appreciate you guys listening. I just got off a morning show I do every month in Toronto called the Humble and Fred Show, and we got to talking about Woodstock 99. They had just watched the new doc on Netflix, and I was there at the time. As some of you guys may know, I've told the story before. It was a big kind of watershed moment for me because I could see how corporations were sort of, going for profit over public safety, and it has a lot of parallels with now, that documentary, because you had Michael Lang, who passed away last year, I've known for my whole life pretty much, and you had John Scher, one of the promoters, who were clearly turning a blind eye to all the tragedy and horror that was apparent in the situation from Friday night, and it only deteriorated. And if you watch the documentary, I was standing next to one of those speaker towers that caught on fire at the end, and tried to make my way out of there amidst the riot and everything. And it was like hell on earth at that time. It was a great example of mob mentality. And these kids that were rioting and raging, yes, the promoters were ripping everybody off, and they'd outsourced all the concessions. And I myself ended up in the medical tent because I got dehydration, because I couldn't get any water, and I got too hot standing in line at an ATM, to take out $20 to buy a $5 bottle of water. And I ended up in the medical tent and missed the band that I'd gone there to see, which was the Tragically Hip. And when I got out, I think like Kid Rock was on stage or something. So you can imagine the horror and disappointment that I felt in that moment. But and when I was in the medical tent, I saw 11 people come in flatlined, and they would just take them in an ambulance to an area hospital where they would declare them dead. It was very messed up, because they didn't want the promoters to have hey, people are dying in the headlines. So I said to the doctor who was giving me an IV thing, I said, dude, this is like ER. And he goes, no, this is like MASH. It was a war zone. And everybody knew it. But my point is, the corporations that had these bans on there, your Corns and your Limp Biscuits and all this crap, they were selling sort of manufactured rage to basically entitled suburban white males, right? These were college kids that were there marauding. These weren't people that had been kept down by the system their whole lives, and this was their moment to rebel against the man. These were kids who grew up in suburban homes with driveways and pools in the backyard and stuff, that were sort of being sold anger and rage as a product because it was easy to produce, right? It was cheap, and it was effective. Limp Bizkit fans were idiots. They were jock morons with, baseball hats on backwards that just wanted to, grope some woman and, get in a fight with somebody else. And in many ways, that's Trumpism, right? Those guys that are 20 years old then are 50 now, or however, 99th, 20, they're 40 now. They're voting for Trump. They're voting for Doug Mastriano. They're voting for Elise Stefanik, who's the congresswoman from that district. Not at the time. She was probably a kid. But anyway, it just, it reminded me of those parallels, of sort of people turning a blind eye to obvious, bad things because they can make money. And that's now the party line. That's the GOP. That's why you have Kari Lake, in Arizona. That's why you had Liz Cheney lose her primary last week to a woman who looks like she stepped out of a Misery casting call, right? As I said on Twitter, if I run off the road in a snowstorm in Wyoming and end up in a rustic bed, I'm pretty much assuming that chick, Harriet Hagman, is coming through the door. She's got crazy eyes if I've ever seen them, And you've seen her clips, so she is crazy, right? And crazy's cheap. Crazy's easy to manipulate. Cravenness, is an attribute in the GOP now. So it was the same thing as these horrible bands and corporations that were selling this crap. Everybody knew it was crap. Everybody who worked at MTV and worked on Woodstock 99 hated the lineup. People were completely bummed they were going to get assaulted by listening to Korn, a band that couldn't even play their own instruments, that would have studio guys come in and do the backing tracks on their albums. Like, I don't think most people know how much of a sort of scam the music business has always been. Kiss couldn't really play on their records. They would bring in outside musicians to like play their tracks. Like, there's so much crap that people are like, oh, it's my favorite band, and like, all the record tracks they're listening to never even had the artist they think they're into. Some old dude sitting there. If I showed you my friend who played like the Korn stuff, you would laugh. But anyway, I digress. But that's part of, that's Americanism, right? Fast food, McDonald's, something that's horrible for you that we're going to sell you because we can make a lot of money off it. That's MAGA now. That's become such a lifestyle brand. And it's been married with sort of these fascist, not even overtones. It's out in the open, right? Ron DeSantis was up in Pennsylvania this weekend campaigning for Doug Mastriano, a guy who's, got a lot of financial backing from Gab, which is the anti-Semitic website that inspired the Tree of Life synagogue shooter in Pittsburgh a few years ago. And he's refusing to denounce him, just like DeSantis is refusing to not, denounce the people that are showing up with swastikas and Nazi flags at his rallies in Florida, right? Why would he denounce them? Why would they risk alienating some white supremacist that might vote for them, or a neo-Nazi? And that's insane, right? That's the kind of thing we all need to pause and take a breath and realize, like, wait, politicians are running on an openly fascistic Nazi platform in 2022. And it's not hyperbole, okay? That's what they're saying. That's what they're running on. Carrie Lake is terrifying, because she speaks well. She's an idiot. If you saw that clip, the live mic where she was calling the New York Times out for nothing, right? Just saying they're evil, right? Because she knows her sort of trashy, ignorant, I got a gun, I hate immigrants voter there in Arizona is going to buy that stuff. And it's so dangerous. It's so incendiary. It has no precedent in the world that ever worked out well, right? Every time this stuff has come up in a leader and a people, especially in Europe, it's a nightmare, right? It doesn't work out well. MAGAism doesn't end well. So to see a whole party at this point get behind it, for fun and profit, so to speak, is terrifying, because it's hard to pay attention to all the places it's happening, right? It's hard to keep track of it. And people are going to wake up in a couple years and be like, how did that guy get elected? How did that guy get in office? It's like Trump. People still don't even know half the stuff he did. I did a car rant this week explaining something that you can read about in a book. You can read about it in James Zirin's book about Trump, when he built his casino with the mob concrete that Paul Castellano and Fat Tony Salerno sold him, and the crooked Teamster head John Cody, right, who had a Teamster strike on the machines, the trucks that carry concrete. They were all on strike in the summer of 1982. And Trump had purchased all this concrete that was about to dry up unless those trucks started rolling. So what happened was John Cody had to give, he had a girlfriend, right, a mistress. He was married, but he had a mole or whatever, mob girlfriend. And he said, give my girlfriend a penthouse when you finish the tower, and I'll let the trucks deliver the concrete. And that's what happened. She got a penthouse right 2 floors below where he lived, right, where Trump's own apartment was. And when she moved into that penthouse, she got a knock on her door three days later, and it was Trump guys. And they were like, we're here to put in the phone lines, right? And she's like, wait, what are you talking about, And John Cody was like, don't let him in, Don't, no way. So he was trying to, bug the mob is my point, right? Trump was always collecting compromat. He was always sort of trafficking in secrets. As I've said many times, one of his big moves was getting somebody to do something that he shouldn't be doing with one of his young models, or somebody he brought around, and then blackmailing that guy. Hey, I got pictures of you and, this 17-year-old Eastern European girl who I kidnapped, basically, and brought here thinking she was going to be a model, and instead she's, working my parties at the plaza. And if you don't want your wife and kids to see those pictures or that video, you better give me that building permit, or you better sign off on this loan, or you better let my daughter, you know, into Chapin, you know, where she got kicked out for staying up and partying all night. That's Ivanka. And then she had to go to school in Connecticut, right? At Choate, Rosemary, right? Rosemary Hall, Choate. It's very, very, uppity prep school in Connecticut. And Ivanka was pissed she got sent there at 15 years old. So her daddy gave her an SUV that was on call all the time to still bring her into the city clubbing, right? So all that stuff is favors, and Trump traffics in favors, and Trump has hidden the records about his life, his whole life, right? You haven't seen Trump's high school transcripts because he can't read, right? For his whole life into adulthood, they harassed the school, the military reform school that Trump was sent to after he attacked his teachers in his Queens school, right? As an elementary school kid. He was such a bad seed. They sent him to a prep school, essentially, reform school for rich kids in the Hudson Valley. It was up near West Point. Trump was such a psycho there. He tried to throw his roommate out a window. He lied and said he was like a star baseball player that was going to get drafted by the major leagues. True story. You can look it up, right? And he couldn't read, right? So they had to hide his transcripts. So they paid that school off forever, like in perpetuity, even built a new gym. And then the school finally went out of business, or was going out of business, and they appealed to Trump one last time to save his alma mater. And he was basically like, oh, sucks to be you. Everything's got to come to an end. And the school went out of business. And, that you never saw his medical records or his education records. His medical records are a completely other thing, as you know, and I've spoken about that. But, Trump had lawyers on staff to continue hiding his secrets. That's what Michael Cohen did. He would write the scary letters to the institutions during this 2016 campaign to Fordham. You better not release his school records. Imagine running for president and not being proud of your academic record, right? You think that would be a prerequisite. For Obama, it was. Right? He was the head of the Harvard Law Review, right? Exemplary education on his own merit, on his own intelligence, not like Don, Jr., who gets into Penn because his dad writes a check, or Jared Kushner, whose father, Charles Kushner, the ex-con, wrote a $2.5 million check to Harvard to get him in, and then built a new lounge at NYU to get Jared into law school, who, by the way, has a new book that comes out tomorrow, and we'll talk about that later. The New York Times did a Hall of Fame review saying he not only looks like a mannequin, he writes like one too, which is pure poetry. Thank you, New York Times. But it's that same thing. It's the theme of mediocrity, right? Let's protect mediocrity, right? That's what the GOP is about. We're the mediocre white ones. We rule this place, right? You could see that in Lindsey Graham, who's in the news this week for defying, the Georgia grand jury that wants him to testify. And he's like, I don't have to testify. I'm a rich white senator. I'm in the party of power. We're not going to do it. And he just had, an appeals judge at the 11th hour on Sunday said he doesn't have to testify right away. The fight's not over, but he's fighting it. How does a senator not obey the laws of the land and show up when you're asked to show up, right? As good citizens, we show up for jury duty. We do what we're asked. A sitting senator, a guy who's in charge of making laws, is defying the law. Entitlement, right? When you saw Lindsey Graham at, Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation get all like spittle inflected and angry that they were questioning. So what if he date raped somebody? He's a kid. Boys will be boys. That was essentially what Graham was pissed at, is that a guy was getting called out for his drunken, misogynistic, predatory behavior decades earlier. Because boys will be boys, and you go through that stuff. But now he's taken his rightful place as a judge, and he shouldn't be impugned in any way or held accountable for his actions. That's the attitude of the GOP. That's what they're trying to protect, an era of mediocrity, because it's worked out well, right? It's worked out for hundreds of years in this country, for white men that are pretty much less than, achieving things based on the color of their skin. and not the content of their character. And that's hard to hear. I'm obviously a white guy, doesn't get whiter looking, you know? But like, I don't want anything for free, and I don't want anything that I'm going to get that somebody else doesn't get a fair shake at. True humanists, true patriots want everybody to be happy, want everybody to get a shot at a good life. The fact that kids are going hungry in this school, in this country, we just ended the free lunch program and free breakfast program for children in many states. Places like California kept it alive, but federally it's not funded anymore. That's insane. A country as rich as ours, how are we not feeding our children? How do you not want every child to go to sleep with a full belly and a safe home every night? How do you go to sleep knowing that that's the case? Because if you do and you think you get away with it, you don't get away with it. Your work isn't done. You can't enjoy that big mansion if you have a good heart and other people are going without. It's hard to sit around the table and eat lobster. But as we're seeing, it's not so hard for a lot of people, right? It's becoming easier and easier because we've dehumanized our own humanity, and the dehumanization has become a political, asset to the GOP. They're thriving off of it because people are signing up for it, and they're picking up their crumbs and being like, this is great. I like Trumpism. I like yelling at immigrants. I like buying a big, stupid pickup truck and not paying attention to climate change. It makes me feel empowered. No, it makes you stupid. It makes you less of a human being. It makes you owe an amends to the rest of humanity because you're not using your time to help somebody else. You're part of the problem. But that has been defined as patriotism now, and it's married with fascism and resentment and xenophobia. In a way, it's become a very toxic, very effective brand, And I'm not trying to like harp on people who have a lot, but if you have a lot and you're not, doing for others, you're not finishing the equation. You're not doing what's asked of you. To harken back to a John Kennedy or somebody. It used to be that way. It used to be if you came from privilege, you had a responsibility to give back even more than others, right? Because you don't have to waste all that time that the rest of us do trying to set ourselves up in life. You were born on third base. Do something about it. Do something good, since you don't have to work through college and all these other things. Get an education that allows you to get out and pursue things that help other people instead of just consuming, right? But that's not what they're selling on the right anymore, and it's horrible to see. I'm recording. You can hear the thunder. I'm in Nantucket on vacation this week. That's why the background is different. If you're watching, it's kind of like the playground of the one percenters, right? And I'm not harshing on anybody here. It's a beautiful place, but you see all these smiling, privileged people, and it's like nothing else is going wrong in the world. And I get it that people are on vacation, right? But there's a reason that all the GOP candidates come here, to be feted and to raise money off of some hedge fund owner who's got a big mansion, right? And in the last couple of weeks, you've had Ron DeSantis, you've had Dr. Oz, you've had even Herschel Walker up here in Nantucket, dancing for the donors, right? Dancing for the one percenters, the guys who can just write them a check and guarantee their success, thanks to Mitch McConnell and Citizens United and unlimited funds in our elections, and corporations as a people. All these concepts that are basically designed to make sure that the playing field will not be equal. They're driven by greed. They're driven by dark money and forces that don't want to change their ways because it's so profitable. Nobody needs a super yacht. I'm looking at the boats here in Nantucket and it's like, what are you thinking? You don't need something that big. It's a blight on the skyline. You can still be rich and get a decent sailboat or a decent motorboat without getting something that's essentially a cruise ship, and you're using it just to transfer your own family around, just to, pull into Nantucket and Palm Beach in the winter and feel like you're a baller with your 8-person crew on a yacht. It's insane, right? But we don't even like bat an eye at that stuff anymore. It's not even seen as obscene, which it is. Any sane society would be like, what are you doing? As I talk about all the time, there used to be like an old money kind of thing where you didn't want to flash it. You lived nice and you lived well, but you weren't trying to rub it in other people's faces. And now it becomes all about rubbing it in their faces. And that's what MAGA is, right? MAGA's like, here, we're going to let you guys rub it in their faces too. We're going to bring you in on this. That's what Trump was doing. He was making the people at his rallies feel like they were going to be billionaires, that they were a part of his gaudy, gold-encrusted wealth and the, hooker wife with the fake titties and all this kind of stuff. Pardon me for being crass, but Melania was an escort. That's what she was in New York City. She wasn't a supermodel. You know what I mean? And there's no shame in sex workers. I'm not trying to shame her. I'm just saying that looked good to a lot of dudes standing in an Alabama arena cheering on the fat guy in a diaper, telling them they were better than the immigrants that were taking their jobs. And they weren't better. In many cases, they were much worse because those immigrants were coming here and bettering their lives and working hard and raising children that they were trying to educate. And you're sitting there cheering on a fascist, using too much fuel, spewing hate, and being as unpatriotic as you could be, helping a con man take over this country. And how did it culminate? Right? The guy's been gone for a year and a half, and we're just now getting back stolen, classified documents that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, was brokering to foreign nations from day one. I guarantee you Kushner went in there on the first day, which is why the intelligence agencies did not want to give him clearance, because they knew how underwater he was with 666 Fifth Avenue, the building he bought right before the crash in 2008 and lost $1 billion out the box. And now he owed $1 billion in a loan that was about to come due, and he wanted to work, the United Arab Emirates and Qatar. Qatar was his big backer that said they weren't going to back him again, and he engineered a blockade with UAE to shake down Qatar and get his financing, and he did. They used it through a cutout in Toronto, a hedge fund, but he got his money, right? So he was looking to fill his pockets from the beginning and cover his own ass. That's what Kushner did. Kushner and Vanki, right? Ivanka, they were the long game ones. As I've said many times, Trump wants music to play when he walks in the room. He wants to get high, and he wants to hit on women. He wants you cheering for him because he's so empty and broken inside and full of shame because he knows he's dyslexic, which there's no shame in, but his father shamed him. So instead of teaching him to read, they just let him get away with it, right? He's an addict. Anybody who's ever been an addict like myself knows deep down you're living with a lot of guilt, a lot of despair. You're living wrong. Trump's somebody who's like almost had to he's a psychopath. He's another level of that, but trust me, the dude deep down knows he's a piece of shit. You can just see it in his face. Anybody who's been around him, he's not somebody who emanates real self-esteem. Real self-esteem is quiet, confident. You don't need to tell the other guy you're the best. Idiot posers do. That's why Trump trades in the wife every few years, because he thinks like, oh, they're going to think less of me if she looks old. So he trades her in for just some vapid, idiot that he wants on his arm like a candy, and then cheats on her all the time, And it's appealing to people. Those character defects have become assets on the right because so many people share them. How much easier is it to just show up at a rally and see like-minded people slapping you on the back, telling you you're the best and you're good Christians and God-fearing people? How much easier is that than doing some real work on yourself, than trying to get yourself out of the mess that life has handed you? It's a lot easier, right? Just like it's easier to, go through the drive-through and, get a burger and fries and a shake than it is to, make a salad, right? It's easier to take 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 the corporate thing that's being offered you, the thing that's not good for you, right? That's going to make somebody else rich, but is sold to you in a way that's going to be empowering, right? That's what it's all about, and that's what Trump's about. And what's dangerous is we've had enough time now that this thing is solidified. They're really getting the engines tuned up on this. It's like a race, like an endurance race in Formula cars or something. They really, they got a pit crew now that knows how to like get that car optimized and back on the track with the same kind of stuff. And that's why they're carbon copying these candidates. That's why you're getting the Carrie Lakes and the Harriet Hagemans, and the Doug Mastrianos and the Glenn Youngkins. I saw a Virginia license plate here in Nantucket last night, and it had "Don't Tread on Me." And it had that flag, with the snake, that yellow flag. I forget what it's called. It's called the something flag, some stupid crap that the militias have now taken, right? That license plate isn't on there to honor patriotism. It's on there to say, I'm a right winger. I'm Virginia, It's branded now. It's branded at the state gubernatorial level. And that's got to scare people, because once these guys take over, once you have 5 Ron DeSantis's doing what he's doing, you're not going to recognize this place. And you're going to have to hope there's a lot of fighting people to turn it around. Because they're going to have all the guns and they're going to have a lot of the land. If you look at an electoral map, it's always red, but for the coasts, right? And a couple cities in the middle, right? So that's going to be imposing when you have entire states, sort of locking people down and attacking the press and attacking education, as they're doing in Florida. DeSantis is the litmus test. You got to look at a guy who reacted to COVID by not listening to science because he knew political expediency, would help him to deny it and go with the conspiracy theory. This is all bullshit. How do I tie it into MAGAism? He mastered it quickly. And a lot of people in his state died, and he saw it as collateral damage. That's just the price of doing business, right? The guy's job when he was a Navy JAG was to advise Navy SEAL teams in the Fallujah surge about what was within the Geneva Convention in terms of interrogating enemy combatants, okay? And he also worked at Gitmo. So you can imagine how that went down, right? You can imagine they probably did all kinds of things, from waterboarding and beyond, right? For a war that was never needed to be fought in the first place, right? Iraq didn't have anything to do with 9/11. It was about oil, right? It was Dick Cheney and Halliburton KBR wanting a piece of those profits, whose daughter is now kicked out, right? By the very same party that prosecuted the war on his behalf, that helped create the toxic masculinity, sheepdog patriotism BS that so many bearded bros have bought into in this country, right? The architect of that, his own daughter, who herself was a homophobe, turned on her own sister who was a lesbian to get political power, who doesn't have a deep moral compass herself. I know she's got a lot of fans, on the left, and I'm happy for her leadership on the January 6th House Select Committee. But, if you sat down and had Sunday dinner with Liz Cheney and you're a liberal, you probably wouldn't agree pretty quickly on a lot of key issues, right? So to see that they'll turn on their own, that there's no level of debasement beyond their reach. They don't care how low they go. They don't care how they look. The New Yorker did a big piece on DeSantis that's excellent. And basically they said, DeSantis doesn't give a fuck. Like, he doesn't care about his big donors. He doesn't care about his citizens. He cares about himself, right? He doesn't care about his wife and his kids. He uses them like props. When his wife was going through cancer last summer, he disappeared over the Christmas break and never told anybody where he was. He's probably courting donors in Wyoming at some secret, meetup in Eric Prince's farm or something, or ranch. These guys are treating politics like a military operation now. That's really what we're in. We're in a soft war, a soft Cold War, and it's happening in America. It's a soft civil war,
in many ways. And it's not so soft. People are dying and getting hurt, and the fact that the entire GOP has gotten behind Trump and are bending over backwards to find excuses as to why he stole those documents. There's a guy named Mike somebody. They're all named Mike, aren't they? The Mike idiot. I tweeted about him yesterday. I forget his name. It's not even worth mentioning. He's from Ohio. And he was like, Trump was just taking those documents because he was writing his memoir and he needed them for reference. No, Trump can't read those documents. Jared Kushner was taking those documents because MBS sent him a list and said what he needed, right? Trump is not reading documents on nuclear energy and fission, and and nuclear armaments. He's just taking what he's told to take to sell later, right? But this Mike guy is willing to go on a Sunday morning talk show and make himself sound like an idiot to appease the boss, right? And they're not really doing it to appease Trump anymore. That's the other thing you need to grasp. They don't respect Trump. They know Trump's an idiot and a fool. There's probably nobody who truly despises Trump more than the people who have to deal with him all the time, because that's just the way he is. His kids hate him. He's an odious man. He literally smells. His breath is god awful because he eats fast food and he's got those wooden dentures and stuff. Like, it's a nasty experience being around that guy, right? On any level. His wives hate him. It's just like nobody's ever liked him because he's a bad seed. But those guys respect the grift, right? So it's not so much that they worship him, it's that they see how easy it was. If that idiot can do it, then I can certainly do it, because he can't even read, right? He can't even concentrate for more than 5 minutes. And look at the power level he's ascended to. It's a year and a half after the guy attacked the Capitol, after having 1 million people die essentially from his mismanagement of COVID, because he saw that as a political gain. And who did he turn it over to? Jared. Once again, making my point, right? Trump wasn't going to get involved with the science. He said, Jared, you deal with this. And Jared was Googling COVID doctors to figure out the White House's response to it, and then brought in his best friend from NYU to head it up. He and his best friend shared a dorm at NYU, and you can see my air quotes because there's more to that story. Billionaires' sons who own apartment buildings usually take their own apartments. They don't choose to live in a dorm when they're in graduate school, but Jared got to share a suite with his best buddy, and he brought that buddy down to the White House to form the COVID response, and then they figured out there wasn't any money in it, so they just gave up. They did a little bit of shaking down the states, with PPE, right? Protective equipment. Remember when, that was the big thing, getting doctors and nurses the right kind of masks and gloves and stuff. And Jared was like, hey, whatever. If you're not a blue state and you're not voting us, get to the back of the line. You're not voting for us, get to the back of the line, right? That's what Jared did. He was shaking down the states. Massachusetts, when they had a load of PPE stuff delivered, it was flown in from China or something, they hired their own armed guards. They had state troopers and stuff escorting it to their distribution center because they were worried that the White House and DHS was going to seize it. That's a true story. You can look it up. That's amazing that individual states were protecting themselves from the federal government to keep the supplies they needed in their hospitals that were being overrun by a global pandemic that was killing thousands of people a day. They had to fight against their own government to protect nurses and doctors because an evil spawn named Jared Kushner was trying to make a buck off it. That story in and of itself is a metaphor for the whole situation. And they applied that MO to all elements, to foreign policy, to domestic policy. That's what mobsters do. Where's my cut? Yeah, but what about my end? But I need you to do me a favor first, right? That's Trump's big line. They bring people in that are easily corruptible, and they make sure that they get what they need out of the situation. And you still have these idiots, these Chad Wolfs, and these guys all, toting the party line. because they're in on it. They're all part of the same gang, so they're not going to start telling the truth now. And none of them have told the truth. You know, Liz Cheney is the only one who stood up to Trump, and they made an example out of her, right? But they're not going to win. You know, to shift here, it's so blatant and so extreme that ultimately democracy will win. Love always wins. You know, peace always wins. The question is, how long and how low do we need to go to learn the lesson, right? And right now, we're going pretty low as a nation because we're not effectively reaching the people that need to be reached. You know, it's no accident they had another turning point thing this weekend, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene was headlining another thing, you know, Mike Lindell's big gathering, right? And they had the thing up in Pennsylvania that DeSantis spoke at, you know. So they're out there recruiting. You know, these rallies are recruitment centers. Just like when there's a natural disaster now, the militias show up and they provide water and stuff and security for the towns that have a wildfire, and then they set up stands and recruit people to become white supremacists. That's not a joke. I'm not making that up. You can look it up. It's happening in all these towns in California where people have, you know, wildfires go through. So they're very active, you know. Like, think of it like in the military when they used to send guys to high schools to try and like sign up the kids that were, you know, fallen below the line, that weren't exactly going to go to college. And I was one of those kids. I mean, I had the hardcore press army recruiter. When I was in high school, he'd take us out and buy us beer and give us rides and stuff and become your buddy, trying to get you to sign on the dotted line and join the services. It was a scam that they sort of have illuminated in the decades since. I don't think they do it in the same way, but back in my day, they'd buy you cigarettes, beer, whatever to get you to, you know, make every dumb promise in the world. And that's sort of what's happening now, right? So they have their recruitment centers, right? The white supremacists are showing up in communities that are vulnerable, that have been ravaged, you know, by climate disasters and stuff, which is dangerous, right? Recruiting people at their lowest moment, where they might look at somebody who's given them water and food. They make pancakes. The famous one like serves pancakes in California. You know, they might be sympathetic to that cause, right? And get indoctrinated in that way of life. So you have that, you know, which is the recruitment center. And then you have these rallies, which is full on like, okay, you're next level. You know, it's like when after you read Dianetics, now you go to the big, you know, thing where we all swim naked, or whatever the hell Tom Cruise and those guys do, you know, or the Mormons or whatever. But like, you know, that's the next level. When you get together in the big group and the flash pots go off and the smoke machine comes out and Kyle Rittenhouse walks out on the stage, like, now you're in it. Now you're at the political Woodstock 99 and you're getting a taste of what it's going to feel like to maraud with your friends, right? And that's where the adrenaline kicks in. That's when you go from individual to groupthink, right? And groupthink culminates in something like a January 6th, which in many ways was a dress rehearsal. But you saw clearly privileged, clearly middle-class white Americans attacking the Capitol, right? The most sacrosanct symbol of our democracy. They were attacking it. You know, they were walking in there with, you know, MAGA hats and destroying the place and trying to kill their own party's vice president, you know, and the Speaker of the House, you know, a woman that had been demonized, you know, as somebody on the left, therefore less than human in their eyes, and they wanted to kill her, right? That's crazy. And that happened in 4 years, you know. So what happens if a guy like DeSantis comes to power, you know? And what happens if you have a half a dozen DeSantises in states around the country grooming their people, indoctrinating their people, right? Eviscerating public education. So people don't even know what to think because they're not educated. They don't know the true history, you know. They only know to hate and resent. They don't know that, you know, the African American community has been systematically preyed upon and had the cards stacked against the entire time they've been in this country, right? They don't want people hearing that. They want people hearing, hey, whatever a white Christian tells you is right is right. Facts are our facts. And that's dangerous because it's not going to take long to create an army that way. Guy goes into high school 15 or 16, gets a few years of that and comes out the other side of it in Florida. You're creating warriors, and not in a good sense. You're creating suicide bombers, right? That's how it works, in the Middle East, in places of unrest. Those guys, the extremists, always prey upon and pick on the kids that have less, that haven't gotten a chance to be fully educated and humanized. And they say, hey, strap this bomb on your chest and you'll live in infamy. That's what we're starting to see now, right? A dude went and attacked the FBI and was shot dead in a cornfield because he believed the BS that in a knee-jerk reaction the GOP started spewing after the FBI served a subpoena on Mar-a-Lago to take back documents that did not belong to Donald Trump, that were part of our national security apparatus. And thank God Merrick Garland signed off on that affidavit and allowed the search to go through. Can you imagine if he didn't? I know he's gotten a lot of criticism, and I know I've been, criticizing him a lot, like read the room, because I was waiting for something to happen, for this to happen, because it needed to happen. You needed to land a punch. And it's not an erroneous punch, it's self-defense, right? But you needed to land something. You needed to show them there were going to be some consequences, because Trump has never seen any consequences his entire life. Nobody's held him accountable because people don't want the hassle. It's like Alan Weisselberg cheated on taxes for Trump for 40 years. He was the CFO. His job was to make sure they didn't pay their fair share to the government. That was his job, was to hide the money so they didn't pay taxes on the perks and the bonuses. How they'd inflate the assets. Trump would say a property was worth $280 million, or something, when it was worth $7 million, and then he'd switch it back when he was, applying his taxes, right? So when he's taking a bank loan, all of a sudden everything's worth a fortune. When he's paying his taxes, it's all depreciated and he's taking a loss. Those are white-collar scams that lots of people do. That's how you get these big super yachts in Nantucket, right? I always tell people, you don't get that rich without hurting somebody. Even if you're a good person, you're not accumulating that much wealth without screwing over the next guy. And even if the next guy is paying your fair share, we need that money, because we are in a country where kids are going hungry, where they're not getting school lunches. Lunch should be free. Breakfast should be free. That should just be a given. In public education, we can provide healthy food for children. Everybody should be ashamed that any child goes to sleep hungry in this country. That's an issue that I've always dealt with because it's personal to me. I've been food insecure in my life. My friends were. I saw Reagan come in and demonize everybody who was on welfare, right? That's what he ran on. Reagan is the guy who came up with Make America Great Again. It was his campaign slogan in 1980. He picked on a woman in Detroit, an African-American woman, and he said, this woman has filed for, food stamps 80 times or something, using 80 different names. She's ripping you off. They're living off the government, living in style, and you're paying for it. And none of it was true, right? And people were living, in bad neighborhoods it's no picnic. Even if you're getting welfare, living in a bad neighborhood that the government has turned its back on, right? Nobody's doing that for fun. Nobody wants to be on public assistance. No one's ripping you off. And to make it shameful, to make people feel shame over not having enough, is a sin. And I felt the psychological impacts of that in my childhood because we were shamed. Reagan was elected when I was 10 years old. 9 years old. He took office when I was 10. And I saw him come in and demonize my friends and my neighbors and myself. We were less than because we were poor, And I was in that situation because my mom was in addiction, and it was a single mom who had me at 19 years old. My dad split young. He was out of there by the time I was 3 or 4. She worked hard. She worked as a waitress, She worked at NASA at one point, like putting data entry stuff, back in those old computers that would fill up a room and you'd put punch cards in there. But she figured out she could make more as a waitress to feed her kids, so she gave up on that career path and waited tables. And then she had her own issues, which she's fully out of now. I mentioned her last week. I didn't want to shock anybody. She was not like a bank robber with a gun or anything. She handed a note to a teller and said, "Give me your money," because she was addicted to drugs, and addiction will make you do anything. And she was trying to keep it a secret and still keep it together and try to put food on the table, and to feed her habit, and she paid a price, as she should have. But she was a white woman, so she went to a place called Camp Cupcake, which is where Martha Stewart went, Alderson, West Virginia, And I remember visiting my mom. I didn't think I'd digress onto this, but after she got arrested, I remember visiting her in the Baltimore City Jail. It was a federal jail, people on federal charges, at Christmas, right before Christmas. And they had a little Christmas party for the inmates, the female inmates and their children. And they would give out little gifts, caps and gloves and stuff. And I remember seeing all these kids playing with their parents like it was not like it was normal, but they were so happy to see their parent and have this little Christmas celebration in a jail. Most of these kids were African American kids, and I remember looking around and thinking these kids are getting caught up into a system that many of them aren't going to stand a chance. I knew in many ways I would get out of this situation because the rest of my family was, had some money and I had places to go. And my grandparents took me in, in a matter of weeks I'm living up in Westchester, in a polo shirt and a nice house in the leafy suburbs. I don't think a lot of my friends and a lot of those other kids in the room got that circumstance because we were in the middle of Reaganism and it was war on these kids. And the crack epidemic came a few years later. And I went back to my neighborhood and all the kids that I ate cereal with and watched cartoons with, and we wore our little Spider-Man pajamas with, had all fallen into the, crack epidemic, and dealing and guns. And those kids weren't growing cocaine, right? Somebody was bringing it into D.C., was bringing it into L.A., right? And who was that? That was Reagan's boys and the CIA trying to fund an illegal war in Central America, right? And the collateral damage in the 80s was young men of color because they saw them as expendable and they saw that they could just lock them up on the other end of it and then make money for the prison industry, right? And make the white voters happy because they could demonize somebody and show how they were law enforcement and making it better, right? That's what happened. That's the pattern. You should watch this movie a documentary called The Four Kings, which is a documentary about the boxers. Sugar Ray Leonard, who was a local hero. He was from PG County. When he was a champion, I was living in PG. Hyattsville I was in. He's from Camp Springs, or not Camp Springs, somewhere right there, Capitol Heights, I believe. Right over the DC line, which is where I grew up. And he was a local hero. So it was Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler, Roberto Duran, who is just a folk hero in many ways, flawed as he is, incredible story, who talk about somebody who felt the hand of American imperialism. My man was from Panama, okay, where we ran all the drugs through Noriega, who was partnered with Bush to bring cocaine out of Colombia up into Central America and up into the Americas, right? And it had Hitman Hearns was the fourth guy, right? But it shows these four boxers, in their careers, but also about the Reaganomics of the time, how the right reacted to Carter and sort of the economic insecurity of the late 70s and the energy crisis with just pure racism, with pure vitriol, with purely demonizing of people that were already getting screwed over. They found a fresh way to demonize them and punish them. That's what Reagan was, and it was cheered on. And it was a scam. He was just in there to make his buddies rich, and his stuff all went south. By 87, 86, the economy was tanking. Michael Milken and those guys were all making a fortune. Your corporate raiders, Wall Street made a lot of money until it crashed, right? But the rest of America, Reagan created the Rust Belt. He created homelessness. because he allowed, the disinvestment in the American dream at the same time he was peddling the American dream in platitudes like it's morning in America and we're going to make America great again. His whole spiel was we're going to bring it back to the 50s. But they weren't really going to do that. And the 50s weren't great for everybody. Certainly not African Americans, who are as much a part of this country and built this country as much as any founding father, if not more. Okay? Because they're without the shame that the founding fathers should carry, because those people owned other human beings. That's why their word is not some gospel. They were just dudes trying to get out of paying taxes like every other white guy since. Right? Generalization, but you get my point. All right? So that's where we're at, man. Watch that documentary, The Four Kings. It's great. And watch the Woodstock 99 documentary if you haven't seen it. Though it's very hard to watch. It'll make your blood boil. I'm still pissed off about that. And I should play you guys the song I wrote about it someday. But it's starting to rain really hard, as you can hear. Nantucket, man. It rains here, man. We got a storm for the next couple of days, and thank God, because we need it. Back in the Hudson Valley, as I've said, the earth is cracked. It's so dry. It's been such a dry summer. My pond is almost like dried up, and I got a lot of turtles and stuff in there I need to keep safe, not to mention my big bullfrogs. So anyway, I know it's really rainy. I don't want to keep talking if you guys have to listen to all this rain. I hope it's soothing. Maybe I should do some like ASMR. Isn't that what they call it? Right? That's meant to soothe you when you hear the fire that I'm spitting, right? And it's just my perspective, but I guess I'm trying to explain where my political thoughts came from, where I got the ideas I got is because I saw it. I didn't read it in a book. I saw what they were doing. I saw this same scam. I saw what Reagan was telling these kids, and I went from the people that were the enemy, right, living in a predominantly black neighborhood, so the people that were enemies to the right and they were getting picked on and that got free lunches, I went from that circumstance to living in the Hudson Valley with a bunch of white kids, many of which, were the sons and daughters of the people that had fled the cities, that were the targets of Reagan and that liked Reagan and that were buying the bullshit, and I saw the ignorance and how it would get repeated around the kitchen table at their homes, and it would end up coming out of the mouths of these high school kids who clearly didn't know what they were talking about, but would give you rants on why unions suck and all these other things that they were hearing their racist parents tell them, right? Because they were being affected by this brainwashing, right? So I've seen this dynamic at play, and I guess that's what this podcast is about, the dynamics. That's what you had to look at Woodstock 99. That's what you have to look at with Trumpism. There's formulas to things. That's how they work. You follow the recipe and you'll bake bread, right? You follow the recipe and you'll break a country, right? And that's what's happening here. And you have to look at these patterns because they've never been stronger and sort of more refined, though I know that's a tough word to use. In this instance, it's what I want to say. They're refined. They're getting good at this MAGAism. They're breaking it down to the core. They're trimming the fat off of it, as a comedian would say, right? They're just down to the pure hate, the pure anti-Semitism, the pure homophobia, the anti-trans stuff. That's why they just keep going back to the same racist stuff, because they'll beat these people over the head with it like a cudgel, and it'll work, and they know it, and we have to counter it. We have to show what the big picture looks like and how it's all a scam, and you will not be better off, just like nobody was better off after the Reagan years, and Clinton came and cleaned up the mess, after ineffective, H.W. Bush had his chance. And then what happened? It swung back to the dude's son, a mediocre white guy. Bush's W seems like a nice guy now, but you couldn't have, until Trump, a more unqualified dude to be president, right? And he did 2 terms. Screwed it all up. The economy crashed. 2008. Barack Obama comes in, cleans it up, does 2 terms. It's all great. Trump comes in, destroys it all again. Now Biden's picking it up again. It's the same pattern. We're cleaning up the messes that are created by a party that's appealing to people's racism instead of their better angels, and giving them empty calories instead of governance, and depleting the resources that you need. You need a bureaucracy, right? You need HUD. You need a Department of Education. You need legitimate law enforcement. You know, the fact that they're now all saying defund the IRS, defund the FBI, that's insanity. And that's what the GOP is campaigning on, right? Not paying taxes, not being held accountable because you're assumed to be innocent because you're white, right? Why would you not pay taxes? You know, and we're already suffering. It's a different subject, but you already got like Jeff Bezos and Amazon that's running trucks up and down the highways all day using American resources and infrastructure, which is already crumbling for their own profit margin, and then not paying their fair share. It's insane, right? But it's the same formula that you've seen applied over and over again. You know, the one benefit of history is that it has a tendency to repeat itself. And if you can notice the patterns, you can change it. Because what you have to do is illuminate to people, this is the gift, this is the scam. You're playing three-card Monte again. You know, you're playing a shell game. And you think you're going to turn over that, you know, nut, and there's going to be a penny there, and you're going to win a bunch of money. There's not. It's going to be empty. They're going to pick up their, you know, shells and walk away for 8 years, and then come back and try to trick you again. It's the same thing. It's just a dude on a corner cheating at cards. That's the GOP now. You know, all the flash, all the pomp and circumstance. It's all a scam. They're scamming you, and they're hoping that they can keep sort of, you know, cultivating and breeding a populace that'll continue to fall for it. And until we get enough voices speaking out against it, people will fall for it. So, you know, change those hearts and minds where you can in your own life. Don't let people just say, we're not going to talk about politics. Now's the time to talk about politics. We're in an election year. Be an advocate for change. Look out for those kids that are going to sleep hungry tonight. Understand that they're just as much a part of America as you are. Understand the pure evil of somebody like Greg Abbott putting immigrants that have already been traveling for weeks on end on buses and sending them to New York City and letting them out in front of the Port Authority, a city that already has a humanitarian crisis in terms of unhoused people, right? He was doing it to D.C. first. Now he's doing it to New York. He's using human beings and families as pawns to make a political point to appeal to ignorant people. That's beyond the pale. That is not American. That is not patriotism. That is craven evil. And we have to stop it. We have to call it out. We all need to get in this fight. Okay? We got less than 90 days till November. We're going to take this country back. We're going to do what we need to do to protect democracy and protect all of us Americans, so we can work together. All right? So that's it. Episode 77. I know it's a rant. That's kind of what the podcasts are these days. I'll tell you some cool music stories or something next time. But, you know, that's where I'm at this morning. This podcast is just about me being honest with you guys and sharing my thoughts. Nothing more, nothing less. But I love you guys. I love the response. People seem to enjoy watching this and listening, and you have no idea how much I appreciate it. So enjoy the last week of summer. You know, I hope it's beautiful where you are. I hope you get a chance to get out and breathe some fresh air, look at the flowers and the colors in the sky. I'm going to be riding a bike around Nantucket for the next week, so I will see you next time. But as again, I always appreciate you listening. Love you guys. Thanks. Peace.